Of the Dhamma study. We're on the chapter on Anicca, Anatta, Dukkha, impermanence, the not self characteristic, and the resulting disappointing experiences resulting from a misunderstanding of impermanence and the not self characteristic. These three concepts are really the heart of what the Buddha is teaching. Understanding and insight into this, and it's a very specific insight into, you hear me say this often. The reason why I do is that there's a whole branch of modern Buddhism called the insight, sometimes called the insight meditation movement, or simply insight Buddhism. It's a offshoot of the Theravadan school of Buddhism, some will say, although it's a very, very hybridized form of really a meditation practice. The only reason I say that is to distinguish that from the insight that the Buddha taught. The Buddha taught to gain insight into these things called the three marks of existence, into the impermanence of all things, into the misunderstanding of what constitutes a self, meaning anatta, the not self characteristic. The Buddha used that word, atta and anatta was a common word or usage of two words during the Buddha's time. He just used it in a significantly different way, to say that what we think of as self is anatta, meaning it's not a self. Your views of a self are wrong views. Let go of those views. And it really is, that's kind of the essence of the Dhamma. And you could say that the Eightfold Path was taught so that we can recognize and abandon wrong views and develop an overarching right view for how we live in the world and how we relate to the world. I almost used the word personal. You know that none of this is personal. From a point of view of profound understanding of the nature of the world. So obviously, any situation that we're going to be in, particularly something as important as our own life, it's best to know what's going on, doesn't it? That's what the Eightfold Path brings us. It's the end of ignorance. Again, it sounds almost silly to say it that way, but the Buddha awakened to the profound understanding that it is ignorance. That's the problem. And it's a very specific type of ignorance. It's ignorance of Four Noble Truths, and it's ignorance of these three marks of existence. Is that clear to mostly everyone here? And I'm leaving Joe out because you're just getting hit with this. Does everybody understand that it is in general what we're looking to gain insight into, the three marks of existence? Okay, and Joe, I'm going to ask you to take a little bit on faith, but not much, because very quickly, and you'll see where this goes tonight, you'll develop a practice where you can actually observe the arising and passing away of all things. In fact, that's again another essential nature of the Dhamma. The Buddha's words from what you read, and I'm going to jump around a little bit between what you read last week and the Culavedalla Sutta, because it's a concise sutta that really speaks to the heart of the matter. So we have a little something else to read. The Buddha's words: be mindful of impermanence to end conceit. Again, you could say, you've heard me say this a lot often, especially recently, that you could take, if you understand the overall context of the Buddha's teachings, you could take one paragraph, or in this instance, one sentence, and you understand the entire Dhamma. Be mindful of impermanence to end conceit. Why is it even skillful to end conceit? Why should I want to do that? In fact, conceit is a word that we usually don't like to apply to ourselves, do we? But conceit is simply another word for eye-making. And in this sentence, be mindful of impermanence to end conceit. It sounds like there's something mixed up here, that the Buddha doesn't really know what he's talking about, but I can assure you he does. It is because of a misunderstanding of impermanence. In fact, it's ignorance of impermanence that allows for ongoing conceit, ongoing eye-making. Does everybody get that? Does everybody understand that? If it wasn't for the incessant compulsion for me to establish a self-referential ego self in every thought, word, and idea that occurs to me, there'd be no stress. Of course there is, because I am continually driven by maintaining this self-referential self, a self that, because of impermanence, cannot be established. And so what does an awakened human being understand of that then? An awakened human being understands that what constitutes a self, that which is anatta, is in a constant process of becoming. And since Anatta, this thing that we have identified as a self, is in a constant process of becoming, guess what? We can become anything we want within bounds. For 63 years, I've been trying to get to 6'4", thinking the Yankees will call. It's not happening. And even if I do, it's not likely they're going to call at this stage. So I've let go of that. I'm not clinging to that idea anymore. But it was tough. It took me 62.5 years to let go of it because I had so identified as the next center fielder for the Yankees. It was a silly notion, wasn't it? Even when I had it at 10 years old, it was pretty silly. That I kept reinforcing it over the years until I was 62.5 that I let it go. It's hard to let go of these creations we've made about ourselves, these assumptions we've made, these things that we've insisted. Now think about this. In my own mind, I created center fielder for the Yankees better than Joe DiMaggio, better than Mickey Mantle by far. And my happiness for at least a while depended on that. We do this with all types of insignificant things, including what really is insignificant in reality, playing center field for the Yankees, especially when you're 5'7" and not 6'4". But because we've created an identity over this, even a silly one, even at the age of 16, I knew that I wasn't going to play center field for the Yankees because I still liked entertaining my own ignorance. At times I thought about it. When I got into a summer league at 16, that I probably shouldn't have. The summer leagues back then where you had to be a really good ball player to get in these leagues. When I got in, I thought for sure that the scouts are going to be following me, and by next year, then I'll be center field. Unfortunately, it was a scout for the Mets that came and looked at me. And
you said, "I'm sorry, I can't go."
I can't go. I can't play. I said, I can't play for the Mets. I don't care. Give me the uniform, give me the money. I would have played center field for the Mets in a heartbeat. Where am I going with this? It is because of a misunderstanding of what constitutes a self that we get stuck in wrong views or wrong ideas. And once we are stuck in those, once we are conditioned to believe that this is us, it takes a near miracle, meaning an eightfold path, to get us out of it. Notice I said a near miracle, but it's not. It's something practical that we can develop in our own life to develop an understanding of the impermanence of all things, what truly constitutes a self, and the nature of our own suffering. I better get into this or I'm never going to finish. The Buddha continues, when impermanence is understood, it is also understood that none of this is self, meaning nothing in the world is self. We stop identifying with the self. We stop taking anything personal. The Buddha said this 2,600 years ago. We recognize that none of this is self. Excuse me. And the Anatta Sutta, the sutta that we review on, is it Saturday night of our retreats? You remember that the Buddha says that if it is impermanent, how could it be a self? How could we claim to establish a self in anything that is impermanent, whether it's a thought, a word, an idea, an object, a possession, a relationship, or anything else? Lao Tzu said, once you understand the impermanence of all things, you'll let go of everything. And why wouldn't you? Why would you hold on to anything that cannot be established? Especially a view of a self. When you understand that a view is like foam on the ocean, there's nothing there. But yet, most of us will spend our lives defending a view that we've made of ourselves rooted in ignorance. And along the way, we'll create ongoing stress because it's not based in reality. Reality is peaceful because it's reality. There's no dissonance in reality, is there? Because I'm not thinking that it should be any different than it is. The harmony is in my own mind, isn't it? But of course, the solution has to be in my own mind, in my thinking, if the problem is my thinking, isn't it? Ignorance is a way of thinking that causes harm. Ignorance of Four Noble Truths creates a lifetime of disappointing experience. Understanding the impermanence of all things is the ending of conceit. Do you see how that is now? Once we recognize the cause of suffering, we'll simply let go of it. It takes a little bit of understanding and undoing it, doesn't it? Like we've described in almost every class, recognizing where that I-making is taking place, and at that point of I-making, practicing restraint, coming back to what's occurring in this moment. Is that clear to everyone except maybe Joe? And I'm not picking on you, Joe.
No, I understand.
And the only reason I'm going to go a little bit deeper into this, I don't like to take things out of context, which is why I'm going to go a little bit deeper into this. What I'm talking about tonight is really the essence of the Dhamma and gaining a true understanding of who and what we are. But isn't that what we all really want to know? You know, and that is developed through this broader platform called the Eightfold Path. So that's kind of what I'm referring to. Let me continue a little bit. Any questions about where I've gone so far?
John, is it no self or not self?
I'm glad you bring it up, because the Anatta often refers to no self, especially in the modern way it's presented, meaning by using it that way, there's no such thing as a self, which points to a common modern misunderstanding of nothingness and a common misunderstanding of emptiness. Those that profess that that anatta means no self, almost like with a hint, you know, there's really no such thing as a self. Once you get that, you're good to go. There's really an inner Buddha nature that takes over when you understand none of that is true. And I don't mean to be saying it this way, to be putting down, and I know I'm coming off that way, so I apologize. I'm not saying it to be disparaging. The Buddha never taught that there's no such thing as a self. He simply taught, by using the word anatta, that what you think of as a self does not constitute a self in reality. The views are wrong views. Let go of the self. Let go of the views. So no self has the implication that there's no such thing as a self. That contradicts what the Buddha's teaching too. Or that the ultimate understanding of awakening is that all things are empty. And usually that'll be followed, all things are empty of a permanent nature. That's true, but that's in that context that it's usually taken and presented in modern Buddhism. Emptiness or nothingness is still presented as some type of an environment that we can aspire to or try to understand. The Buddha didn't care about that in any way. The Buddha taught emptiness in this way, that we should recognize and abandon ignorance. In other words, to empty ourselves of ignorance, or empty ourselves of clinging to wrong view. So a long-winded answer to answer it, no self is really the wrong interpretation of the words. Not self is more clearly associated with the words, because it points to the views that I'm holding of a self are not a self. They don't actually constitute a self. I need to gain some understanding. And that points to what I'm going to become in this moment. Is that clear, David? So again, this is really getting to the essence of the Dhamma. What is it? What is all this pointing to? It's pointing to end in conceit, like the Buddha said in that first sentence. The problem is the problem is trying to continue to establish a self in a way that cannot be established, meaning a permanent way, rooted in wrong views. If I don't understand the nature of who I am in relation to the world, and I truly understand that, why would I insist on continuing to establish a self in a way that I know can't be? Because I am stuck in a conditioned view that compels me to ignore my own ignorance. Even though I know from my own lifetime of experience, it can't be true. What's got me looking at Buddhism in general in the first place. Something doesn't make sense here. Frank, you had your hand up?
I did, just because when we get into these like very specific teachings, I think it's missing the larger view of the experience of the Four Noble Truths. So yep. when I bring it down to that specific teaching, the confusion comes up. It's like I have to keep things simple for myself. It's all rooted in ignorance of ignoring the experiences of the Four Noble Truths. Yep. And how it naturally happens. We're not doing it on purpose. It's a phenomenon that happens very naturally, where you self-identify with external things. And then this is what creates a mind that's always seeking pleasure, avoiding pain, and like the neutral feelings. Yep. So for me, I mean, it's like, I don't know. It's where it gets really confusing on how to teach somebody about the three marks of existence without them really getting an understanding and having the right view of what is going on.
You ought to try sitting teaching it from here.
Well, I mean, like teaching it to myself so that I can understand it.
It is. And that's the reason why there's a lot of repetition here, because we're going over the same material literally at every class, you could say. Slightly different words and different ways of coming at it. So I think it was Mary that said last week, like, you finally heard right view in a certain way that made much more sense than it ever did before. And it is just that, you know. And these seem complicated, but it's only because of our own conditioned views against seeing these things clearly. Frank can say what he said. I don't mean to put words in your mouth, because you've developed an understanding of what we're talking about, you know, and how it applies. You have to understand the context. These teachings are of no value at all, or very little value, unless you understand the context in which to apply them and actually do that. You know, and then they make perfect sense and they seem completely useful. Liz?
And it's also not intended to cause a crisis as to identity of self either, where, well, then this means that I'm not anything. The self, as a self, you are a reference point in time and space.
Yep.
If something's coming at you, you can move out of the way. If you're walking through a doorway, you don't hit either side of the, you know, like, you are a reference in space. You're not a non-existent self. And I think sometimes when we start on the conversation of the not self, there can be a little bit of some people can have like a personal crisis of, does this mean that I don't exist, or that I need to be extremely passive, or do I, you know, what exactly does it mean? It just means that you don't need to put yourself into everything as it comes up and then take it personally.
Yeah, you stop taking it personally. Thank you, Liz. That thought or that feeling of annihilation happens often, especially in early Dhamma practice, when the implication of what we're talking hits home. It does feel like annihilation. It feels like I'm letting go of everything that constitutes me. And that's why it's so difficult. But when we understand that what seems to have that real palpable hold on us is like foam on the ocean. There's nothing there. And every time we recognize and let go of or abandon a thought rooted in ignorance, we're moving a step closer towards awakening. And it really is a process of undoing our views, recognizing them and letting them go without judgment, being very gentle with ourselves. And again, remember, this follows on the virtuous factors of the Eightfold Path, and then the concentration factors. So we know how to recognize eye making when we're in the unskillful factors of the unskillful side of the virtuous factors. We know immediately, recognize it and abandon it. Was there any other hands up? No? Okay. The Buddha concludes that with saying, when fully established, release is complete. Release from what? Release from clinging to wrong views. I gotta pick this up a little bit. Now here the Buddha relates this to, relates clinging to the 5 clinging aggregates. So over the next couple of weeks, we're going to go over this impermanence and not self-characteristic, the resulting dukkha, dependent origination, and the 5 clinging aggregates. So there's a lot that we're going to be going over the next 2 weeks, and it all kind of relates to each other. The Buddha's words: friends, form, meaning physical body, physical objects, is like foam. Seeing clearly, form is empty and without substance, whether past, present, or future, internal, external, subtle, or obvious. Seeing form as it truly is, like foam on the water, brings wisdom to the well-instructed. Clearly seeing, they become disenchanted with form, disenchanted with feelings, disenchanted with perceptions, disenchanted with fabrications, and disenchanted with consciousness. Form, feeling, perceptions, mental fabrications, and ongoing thinking are the 5 aggregates, right? Why is the Buddha describing the desirability of developing disenchantment with those things that we're using to describe ourselves. He's simply pointing out to recognize what we're clinging to, what we're taking personally, what we say is me or mine, or what we say I need to be happy. Recognize it and let it go. Because if you really want to be happy, you'll let go of everything. It doesn't mean you won't have anything. The best example of that I can give is we all came here. We left our nice warm houses with all our stuff and our clothes and our dogs and our cats and our kids and our pots and pans and our cars and coats and everything else. And we came here. We didn't have to bring all that stuff with us to maintain control of it, did we? It's all going to be there. But we came here. We had a nice little meditation and we learned something. We don't have to cling to things continually in order to maintain possession of them. We even have laws to help deal with that. So let go of all your stuff. What you need will still be there. But if you got a real nice car, leave it in front of my house. As we recognize, and you can relate this right back to that brand new car that we just got. If you understand impermanence, you'll even let go of the need to polish that thing every time you walk by it. You'll probably take good care of it. It's a good idea to wash a car every now and then, but not to be obsessed with anything. Not to take anything personal, because nothing can be taken personal. It's the essence of wisdom. I got to get to this next, unless I break this up into two things.
Yes. Yes.
I think I will, because I want to get into that Dhammadinna, but there's also, so this will be a 2-week class. Friends, when a learned follower has heard the truth and understands the truth, they will no longer cling to form or to feelings or to perceptions or to fabrications or to the flow of thoughts, meaning they'll no longer cling to the 5 clinging aggregates. They will clearly see that this is not me, this is not mine, this is not myself. They are fully released. I think I'm going to leave it there because we did cover a lot. Does everybody understand? Well, let me just lay the context for it this way. The first noble truth is dukkha occurs. As a consequence of having a human life, there is going to be disappointing and unsatisfactory experiences. There's going to be mild disappointment. There's going to be outright and extreme emotional and physical suffering. It's all part of having a human life. Dukkha occurs. None of that, when it occurs, is personal. The second noble truth is craving originates and clinging perpetuates that suffering. And remember, this all originates in wrong views or ignorance. Ignorance of Four Noble Truths. The third noble truth states that cessation of that process is possible. That speaks specifically to impermanence, doesn't it? If there wasn't such a thing as impermanence, once this thing became established, whatever we want to call it, a self or not self or no self or anything, it's done. It's fixed in place. It's permanent. There'd be no getting out of this. But because all things are impermanent, and most importantly, because my deluded thinking is impermanent, I can develop the fourth noble truth and awaken. I can end clinging to wrong views. I can develop, this is how the Buddha describes awakening. I can develop a profound understanding of the nature of suffering. That's how the Buddha described awakened right view. I can develop a fully released quality of mind, meaning released from all clinging to all wrong views. That's an awakened human being. That's also described in a human being who takes nothing personal, because there's no reason to take it personal, because of wisdom. Because an awakened person understands the impermanence of all things and ceases attaching itself to anything, especially to wrong views. Let's talk. We'll go around the room. Ron, good to see you.
Good to be here again. I don't think I have anything to add at the moment.
I'm
I
glad
have a
you're
question, but it's more of a packet.
Oh, you can chime in if it comes up. Let me go to Akila, because you said you have to, it's 8 o'clock now, so you have a little time.
Sorry I mentioned that.
Yeah, but you're still under no obligation.
Just general, my practice is going well, pretty consistent, but I still haven't developed an evening practice. This is the only time that I meditate. I need to work on it.
Yeah, and I didn't mean to interrupt you, please.
Okay.
Don't think that it has to be 20 minutes or 30 minutes. Even if just to start it, the same thing. Start with 2 or 3 minutes, and pretty soon you'll have a second set. So. I interrupted you?
No, that's enough.
Oh, okay. Christine, good to see you tonight. How are you?
Good. During my practice, about the year and
I'm glad you. I'm going to go to Frank too, in case you got to go, Frank.
Good to be here. The class is getting large. Yeah, I don't really have anything to add about the 3 marks of existence. I think that it's simple enough for me to remember that everything that arises passes away, and that's the impermanence of all things. And I was just sharing with Drew on the way up here, like uncertainty used to put fear in me, because I clinging to things like the way they were, or trying to create an environment, raising a family. But I guess studying these teachings helps me understand, that things are always changing. It's a natural process, and I actually look forward to that impermanence, because where the clinging perpetuates the craving, and that creates the dukkha, the suffering, and it's like that feedback loop of what I want and what I don't want. That it's within that environment that it passes away too, and then you can feel that cessation of the dukkha, and it's all good.
Thank you. Yeah, you're having a direct experience of the arising and passing away of all things, including dukkha. I mean, that's an important understanding, because once you really get it, that relates directly to right view and understanding the arising and passing away of all things. So, thank you. Glad you're here. Joe, you might as well go next. How was your meditation?
I enjoyed it. It was, I'm not quite sure, it was really new to me and stuff, and so it was really tough trying to calm my mind and stop with all the thoughts, and so it seemed like to go by really quick, but it was nice.
That's so the point of meditation is not to quiet your mind or not to have any thoughts. It's simply not to be distracted by your thoughts. And I know right now that probably seems like a pretty fine line to you, but it really just means that we're not distracted by our thoughts. Our thoughts are flowing, but we are mindful of our breath. And when in the instructions, when you find that you're caught up in your thinking, come back to the sensation of breathing. And it's both of those components. It's important to remember both of those components are a meditation practice. It's not just being mindful of your breath. Meditation is for deepening concentration. Every time we acknowledge that we're caught up in our thinking and come back to the sensation of breathing, we're deepening concentration.
That's what I noticed, because I tried starting off with the breathing really, and then I guess as I would think and things would come, I would kind of lose that. And then just like you said, you would say that, go back to the breathing. And so that is, I definitely.
Yeah. And it's just that, and I've said it 100 times tonight, so you'll remember, it's not just meditation that we're learning and developing here. It's part of the broader framework of the Eightfold Path. And that's what our classes are about. This is a typical class, and that we'll meditate. I'll give a talk on something related to what the Buddha actually taught, and then we'll talk about it. So, if you're going to start a practice on your own, I suggest start with short periods of meditation, 2, 3, 4, 5 minutes. And if you can do that twice a day and then be part of our Sangha, you'll have a meditation practice. And then to learn as you go along, to be part of our Sangha and learn about the broader framework. But that's what our classes and my books are about. There's a recording of this meditation on the website from 5 minutes up to 45 minutes if you want to use it to guide your meditation too. But welcome to our Sangha. Glad you're here. Drew, good to see you tonight.
A little more practice than I do usually this week. It's nice to devote the time to sit. I definitely struggle with the detachment. Frank was saying that the talk brings up a lot of different notions, and for me, I had a real dose of attachment, which comes to me now probably more through my children than for me personally anymore. In my son's end of the season wrestling tournament, he lost his last 2 matches. I expected him to win. And my emotional response to that was just awful. And you know, I understand. You know, he's 8 years old. So I got a long road ahead of me. And here's the worst of it is I know how long it is. His oldest brother's 24 years old, and captained this college team. And I went through this for 15 years with him. But I don't know that I want to be detached from it. I don't know that I want to. You know, it's like, can you enjoy the Eagles' victory if you were really detached from the outcome of the Super Bowl?
I like Frank. Could you?
I enjoyed it for 5 minutes.
To answer your question, yes, you can, Drew, and you'll get more out of it because it doesn't need to be any different than it is. Developing full human maturity doesn't mean that we don't enjoy our lives anymore. In fact, it means that we enjoy them from the point of right view, from seeing things clearly. So nothing needs to be any more than it is. If your son happens to win the states, it's just a wonderful experience. And if he doesn't, you'll be disappointed while it's appropriate to be disappointed. But like, just to use the example, which sometimes happens with overzealous parents, is the kid gets punished because he didn't win the states. And I know you didn't do that, but that's just using the example. This is what happens when you have a wrong view, and your view is attached to it. Your sense of self-worth is attached to it. How could my son lose the states?
I think the attachment is so conditioned, so much a part of our culture that it's almost bizarre to think of being attached from it. And my experience with woodworking is great. You know, it's I can make something that I'm really proud of, and be tired of it before I'm finished putting the finish on and give it away. You know, I may have put 100 man hours into it. It's great. I have fun doing it, and somebody can have it and appreciate it. I'll on to the next project because I enjoy the process. But the sports is different. You know, it's so deeply ingrained in me that it's really
win at all costs.
Reaction.
Yeah, it is. I love playing sports. And my father was a big sports guy, so he encouraged it. He maybe over-encouraged it. And what I didn't like was that idea that you had to win at any cost. I never could kind of get around that. But the idea of just engaging in sports, running and chasing after balls, was great fun. I had a teacher many, many years ago. His name was Arnold Patton. He kind of felt the same way. He loved tennis, but he hated the competitive aspects of tennis. So he developed this way of playing tennis that's non-competitive. He's still doing it 20 years later. Him and his buddies get together and they just try to keep the ball going over the net as long as they can. Most people think that's crazy. And again, that's getting right back to what the Buddha recognized as one of the problems was a competitiveness among people. That we've made games over it. That's okay, but one of the problems that we have. I'm glad you're here tonight. Scott, good to see you tonight.
Good to see you. Before I knew about the Eightfold Path, a few years ago, over 10 years ago, I had an existential crisis where all of a sudden I had a realization that everything was a lie. And I lost my identity for a little while. And I had to believe lies again to get my identity back. And now I'm realizing now that I was just missing the idea of the Eightfold Path.
Yeah.
And following that. So basically, it was just very odd that I lost my identity and then had to believe the lies of who I was again, so I could function again in this world.
That was the only usable reference you had. So you had to, we use what's familiar to us to describe ourselves to ourselves, to describe our reality. So, and now you have it. When the Buddha was seeking enlightenment, he studied with these two teachers, Alara Kalama and Uddaka Ramaputta, and they both taught variations on the Vedas. One was that the highest achievable mental state was the sphere of nothingness or not nothingness, put your head around that. And Uddaka Ramaputta thought that awakening is neither perception nor non-perception. Again, one of the great modern Buddhist teachers, Nagarjuna, explained those teachings and established himself as one of the great Buddhist teachers. Of course, he explained it in a way that contradicts what the Buddha taught, that these mystical descriptions of an environment in both of those terms, and in the modern usage of the terms of emptiness and nothingness, are simply ways of establishing a self in a realm that's acceptable, even though it's imaginary. And so we can do these same things with any type of familial thought. And when we realize that what I'm basing everything on is nothing, when we really understand it, it can be pretty devastating, because what do we got to hold on? What do we have to reference ourselves in the world? And that comes back to who and what we are, what the Buddha awakened to. We are always in a process of becoming. And if I can have my mind well concentrated and my mindfulness framed correctly, meaning I'm established in right view, then moment by moment as my life unfolds, there will be great meaning, what you were talking about too, Keela. There'll be great meaning and purpose in each moment, no matter what's occurring. It could be the most mundane aspect that I've ever engaged in, pick one. There's a million of them if we have a life. But it has meaning because I'm present for it. And that's enough. And that, in fact, that's everything. That's all the meaning that anything can have, is being present with it. And so there was your existential crisis too, when you lost that. But now you've gained it back. You've gained back some equilibrium anyway. Yeah. And that's just how it is. And that can be experienced often during this Dhamma practice too, because we're letting go of views that we've used to establish ourselves. Glad you're here. Jessica, good to see you.
Hi, good to see you. I'm just taking it all in today.
Good. Yeah, I'm glad you're here.
And I'll pay attention to the signs from now on.
Glad you made it.
Thank you.
Margaret, good to see you. See you, Keela. See you, Christine.
See you.
See you, Joe. Glad you made it tonight.
Sort of trying to maintain a practice. Remembering that when I travel for work, it's actually something I can take with me and not leave behind. So that's a sort of, I don't know why it's a struggle when I travel for work.
Almost everybody says that.
Yeah. But also I'm having a little bit of a trouble with the not clinging to, I'm in managing a project right now that requires decisions to be made on a certain schedule. And so I'm definitely, the loop in my head is constantly playing in terms of like, okay, trying to keep on top of things, having to make choices and decisions in a tight time frame. Being able to turn that off is been a challenge. When I need to turn it off. It can't be like that all the time.
No, that
drives me crazy.
That's kind of the point, isn't it?
Yeah.
To
so
do that.
I mean, it is helpful to just sit and meditate and definitely just turn it off.
Yeah. And that's all you can do, so recognize that that's the point. Do it when you can, but don't judge yourself harshly when you can't. Again, that's the common human problem. This monkey mind. I'm glad you're here tonight. Lorna, good to see you.
Good to be here as always. I really don't have anything profound to say tonight, but it's just wonderful again to hear the rundown that you can say so fluent. This sort of nonsense that goes on in our head, you can say so fluently. Makes sense every time you hear it, and it's good to hear it and hear it and hear it. That's one thing I had to say. And then on Saturday, I had a teaching with you on Saturday morning, and then we had Matt's Qigong class afterwards, which was great, just sensational. But he went into explaining, I love doing Qigong. I don't know why, I've never had it explained to me why I like it so much. But he was explaining that, your senses are always looking outward. Your ears, your sight, you're kind of looking outwards all the time. In Qigong, you literally turn your hands to yourself and you think about yourself and your body for an hour. And which is what we do in meditation, that we kind of tune out the outside world and we think about our thoughts, our breath and our thoughts and our body. And the way he put it, he, you know, I don't say what he said, but he's put it in a much more fuller and broader and explained it a lot better. But he gave just a wonderful explanation about noticing where your mind is. Like, if your mind is out searching for stuff, or is it looking more inward to your own body where your own life is. And I just thought I'd mention it. It was just a wonderful explanation of what Qigong is, and it's so akin to the Dhamma, and very, you know, it's another leg to the Dhamma almost. It isn't, but it's Qigong, but it's, you can almost see the mental side of it is like another leg to the Dhamma. It's, the two practices are so similar. It's it's refreshing to have someone else's view and view of the same thing. It's very refreshing. I agree. Very stimulating.
Matt has a great understanding of Qigong, but he also understands how it relates so well to the Buddha's teachings. And they're both the Buddha's teachings unite the mind and the body. Some people will be surprised to hear that. And Qigong does exactly the same thing. In fact, Qigong does it with an underlying philosophy that is very similar to what the Buddha taught. Every self-referential thought is an external thought, even if it's objectified. Like I'm thinking about my brain right now. Well, you would say, well, that's an internal thought. It's not really. I've objectified my brain and I'm thinking about it in a conceptual way. So every thought that we have until we've united our mind and our body is an external thought. And that's another reason why it's always stressful, because it's not here. It's not present with what's occurring in our lives. But when we develop the Dhamma, beginning with on our cushion, deepening concentration, we're bringing ourselves into our life as our life occurs. We're giving ourselves a chance to live our life. Literally giving ourselves the only chance to live our life. We've got to be present for our life. Thank you for bringing that up. Mary, good to see you.
Good to be here. My practice is going well. I'm just trying to fully leverage any gains I make in concentration, in improving, my view, my intention, and the integration of the results of Krishna. So I'm glad to be here.
I'm glad you're here. Helen, good to see you.
Thank you. Good to be here. When I think about the 3 marks of existence, I just kind of boiled it down. To me, the simplest way to look at it is don't get hung up on anything. Don't cling. And just kind of be present with it, but roll with it. And that's kind of how I take it. I know it's very complicated, and the more you look into it, the more there is, but I keep coming back to that because then that makes sense to me.
Makes sense to me too. That's pretty good. I'm glad you're here tonight.
Thank you.
David, good to see you.
I think I'm good tonight, John.
Oh, there you are. Glad you're here. Bonnie, good to see you.
Good to see you too. Remembering how when I first came in, started listening and talked about the 3 marks of existence, and I remember I had this image of myself running back and forth in my house with my hair on fire. It's sort of, and actually I just had this other image of when you put a piece of pottery in the kiln and sort of chemical burns away, and then what comes out is this sort of, it's not a skeleton of itself, but it's sort of like after the fire, what remains is for me being able to look at who we are and being able to allow myself to be okay with the authenticity of the the part of myself that has the reactions, and to be aware of what arises by actually acknowledging what arises, then it's easier for me to let it go than having all these things arise, and be like, it's okay, I don't have to deal with it, or I have to deal with it, or I have to deal with it in this way. So I think the deeper I go into understanding, anyway, yeah.
Thank you, Bonnie. It's kind of like solving a riddle we didn't know we had to solve, isn't it?
Yeah.
Who am I? What's going on here? But then we realize that it's not those big questions of who I am.
And when you really listen, though, you can
Yeah.
be okay, or I try to work towards that. This is who I am. This is who I'm becoming, because it's different than it was 6 years ago, 5 years ago, 2 years ago. You know.
Yes.
And to be okay with whatever it is, even if it's not what I wanted it to be or who I thought it was.
Yeah, when you're young, when you're just a kid, you're not supposed to know everything. You're not supposed to know who you are. But the idea of awakening, gaining full human maturity, is kind of the point of being a human being, isn't it? I mean, wouldn't that be more of a primary concern growing up than any other thing? Yet it's not, isn't it? Our primary concern is to maintain this thing that can't be maintained. And it only brings.
Be told to develop it.
Yeah.
You have to, know who you are.
Yep.
Become the best thing you can be. All that stuff.
Yeah. And in the end, it's really, it's the most important thing we can do, I think. The Buddha thought the same way. And even though it's the most important endeavor we can engage in, it is possible to overemphasize it, isn't it? But we got to do it. This is applying right effort to not self. And I think it'll make sense to you now that you understand where the resistance to awakening even comes. Where does the resistance of gaining full human maturity comes from? Because I don't want to wake up. What happens when you wake up? You got to go to work. You got to take responsibility for your life and how you feel and how you think and how you interact with people. Sometimes annihilation seems even easier than that. So we create that game that I'm letting go of everything. It's too hard. But the truth of the matter is, all that we're letting go of is the possibility to be disappointed in the next moment. Why do we hang on to that so tenaciously? Frank, I want your answer.
No, I was just thinking that, it seems so serious, the teaching on the 3 marks of existence. And the way I see it is it's just a characteristic of living a human life, and that it's a very subjective state that happens to you naturally.
Yep. Yeah, that's it.
That's it.
And so gain the ability to see what's going on correctly in reality. Liz.
It's good to be here. Lots of good stuff tonight. I liked what Lorna said about Matt's class, and that's something that's always helpful to me is when I get in the box with the squirrels, I can always just sort of force myself to back down into my body somehow.
Yeah.
And and even if it's just doing, the tapping, that just a piece of Qigong can kind of bring you out of that.
Yeah.
Back into your body and your physical space and out of your head a little bit.
Yeah. It's such a great help to what we do. Third Saturday of every month, Matt teaches his class now. And have a class here and go right with him.
That's all I have.
Thank you. Drew, good to see you.
I'm saying everything I was concerned about. Still
Well, I'm glad you made it too. What a great class. So we're gonna go over this subject again. You could read that chapter again. You could read the Culavedalla Sutta, where Dhammadinna teaches her husband, because I'll read more of that next week. We'll probably spend 2 or 3 weeks on the next week of dependent origination and 5 clinging aggregates. Pardon me?
Is that one in the book?
Dhammadinna?
No, the cool.
No, No, it's linked
It was
in.
in the newsletter.
Yeah, it's linked in this email.
Newsletter.
Yep. If you can't find it, send me an email.
There's a teaching online.
I can see it.
Yeah.
Is that the sutta about the nun? Dhammadinna?
Yep. Yeah, I'll read it and talk more about it next week. But it's all right. Our painting day at Raritan Learning Cooperative is Sunday, March the 4th, begins at 1 o'clock. So I hope you can join us. Bring a paintbrush or a roller or something to clean windows. Windows clean day.
Paper towels.
Paper towels. I think Mary Beth will have that stuff too, but it'd be good to just bring something. All right, let's finish with metta as we always do. Find your relaxed meditative posture and gently close your eyes and gently close your mouth. And again, become mindful of your in-breath and your out-breath. And these are the Buddha's words on metta from the Karaniya Metta Sutta. This is what should be done by one who is skilled in goodness and who knows the path of peace. Let them be able and upright, straightforward and gentle in speech, humble and not conceited, contented and easily satisfied, unburdened with duties and frugal in their ways, peaceful and calm and wise and skillful, not proud or demanding in nature. Let them not do the slightest thing that the wise would later reprove. Wishing in gladness and in safety, may all beings be at ease. Whatever living beings there may be, whether they are weak or strong, omitting none, the great or the mighty, medium, short, or small, those seen and the unseen, those living near and far away, those born and to be born, may all beings be at ease. Let none deceive another or despise any being in any state. Let none through anger or ill will wish harm upon another. Even as a mother protects with her life her child, her only child, so with a boundless heart should one cherish all living beings, radiating kindness over the entire world, spreading upwards to the skies and downwards to the depths, outwards and unbounded, freed from hatred and ill will. Whether standing or walking, seated or lying down, free from drowsiness, one should sustain this recollection. This is said to be the sublime abiding. By not holding to fixed views, the pure-hearted one, having clarity of vision, being freed from all sense desires, is not born again into this world. Thank you all for a wonderful class. Peace. Thank you all for joining me online.